Welcome to our new series, Our City in the Past. Today I'm in Carlisle, Cumbria, and in this episode I'll be examining the folktale The Defenders of the City, a tale of unsung heroes, a tale that for over 2.5 centuries has laid claim that it was by the actions of heroism and courage by a city of ordinary people that led to the defeat of an invading army and perhaps saved the entire country from an uncertain fate. Today, Carlisle is a flourishing city in both industry and tourism, but 262 years ago, in 1745, the city here was very much a different place. Like many cities in 18th century Britain, Carlisle was encased within a high defensive wall with only a small series of gates for access. The castle was the city's strong point, strategically positioned to the north to cover the approach routes from Scotland. England had, after all, been involved with on and off conflicts with the Scots for many centuries. On August the 19th, 1745, those in Scotland who were loyal to the exiled King James had flocked to the arrival of his son, Charles Edward, and a new Jacobite uprising was underway. Charles Edward Stuart, better known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, now led an army of over 8,000 clansmen towards England. His goal, to collapse the already fragile union between England and Scotland, descend upon London and take the British monarchy by force, deposing King George II and inevitably allowing his father to retake what they believe to be his rightful place on the throne. But who exactly were the Jacobites?
The word Jacobite comes from the Latin Jacobus, meaning James, and it all stems from the succession of the Stuart dynasties. Charles II dies, and James II, his brother, inherits the throne. James was more overtly Catholic than his older brother, and it's the conflict of interests of James' Catholicism and government that leads to him fleeing to Ireland. We have William of Orange coming over with Charles's daughter Mary, and the whole basis of the English throne changes. William and Mary come to the throne, James is exiled, and as a result of that, his son James Stuart, otherwise known as the Old Pretender, has this claim to the English throne, or the British throne. And in 1715, there are several Jacobite rebellions, but one of the principal ones is 1715, when James the Old Pretender has the first Jacobite rebellion. And then 30 years later, his son, as we know as Bonnie Prince Charlie, James Edward Stuart, he basically takes up the banner again on behalf of his father, who's now obviously an old man, to try and claim the throne again. And that brings us to the year 1745.
Charles initially intended to enter England in the east and immediately take on the garrison situated at Newcastle, but his senior officers insisted that they go by way of Carlisle.
Well, actually it made sense. In Newcastle there were 10,000 redcoats for the clans to contend with. Carlisle's own local regiment, the 34th Regiment of Foot, were in operations in Europe with the War of Austrian Succession. There were only 80 soldiers left to guard the entire garrison, and these were men who were, well, past the time who had been injured in past battle, all invalids. The garrison did receive some militia, or equivalent of today's TA, to help once they were alerted to the clan's invasion plans, but in the 18th century, militia were no more than moderately trained locals who were most certainly lacking in military standards and discipline.
With 8,000 clansmen by his side and an opposing army of only 1/100th the size, Charles marched south into England and Carlisle. The tower of the cathedral was the highest point of the city in 1745, and from here the sentry guard would observe all the approach roads to and from the city, and by using the bells in the tower could warn the people and the remaining soldiers of any danger. On the 9th of November, a scouting party of about 60 appeared behind me to the north of the city on Stanwick's bank, sending the unexpected and unprepared people of Carlisle into disarray.
The initial reaction was, as all, I suppose, good gunners would do. They fired the cannons from the north rampart, and if people visiting the castle today, you can see the wide bastion on the northern side, which acts as a gun platform, and it looks directly across to Stanwick, so they would have had a clear field of fire as the army approached.
The following day, under the shadow of dense fog, the clans surrounded the city on all sides. The garrison commander and the mayor ordered a town meeting where they addressed the townfolk. It was from these steps where they revealed the clan's intentions and, with no other real choice, asked of them a most unexpected request. Would they be willing to stand together, bear arms as soldiers, and fight off the invading Highlanders.
Now, you have to appreciate these people weren't soldiers. You're talking farmers, grocers for heaven's sake. And a large number of these people were in fact women and children.
After much fear and apprehension, the people of Carlisle agreed, and following a short induction of weaponry and unarmed combat, made their way to the city walls, yielding pitchforks and worldly objects to, if called to, fight off the advancing clansmen.
Essentially, as the guns in the castle and on the city walls kept the army at bay, and they decided to move across to the small town of Brampton, which is about 9 miles to the east of Carlisle.
Intelligence had reached Charles that soldiers from Newcastle had been dispatched to relieve Carlisle and were only a few days from arrival. Hamilton's shoe shop here in Brampton was used by Charles as his headquarters, with the little coffee shop opposite as sleeping quarters for his senior officers.
Well, it seemed appropriate to name the shop after the Jacobites. The siege of Carlisle is part of local history, and I think it's important to remind people of what happened here, how a city of ordinary people stood their ground against an invading army.
Here in the headquarters, Charles and his war cabinet formed their plan. They intended to use the element of surprise, and with the advantage of fighting from high ground against the approaching English garrison, they expected to win. But preparation was in vain, as luck by chance was to fall on the side of the Jacobites this day. Bad weather, indeed the worst snow blizzards for decades, had halted the English army some 30 miles short in the town of Hexham, and they had already begun a retreat back to Newcastle. Charles believed that fate was truly on his side, and he immediately issued the order to his clans that they were to recommence their siege of Carlisle immediately.
One of the principal requirements of any siege is timber, and particularly for the things of use of scaling ladders. And the garrison commander quite sensibly had ordered timber, but also the ladders and so on in surrounding villages and the area close to the city to be brought in into the city and deny the use to the Jacobite army. So as a result of that, Bonnie Prince Charlie essentially commandeers the local joiners, woodsmen, etc., and acquire timber to build the scaling ladders and other things that will be needed to actually commit to the siege.
There are many accounts on what happened next, but the majority speak of violent attacks against the city walls. Fire! Cannon and musket fire throughout the day, throughout the night, but the combined efforts of the invalid soldiers, the militia and the people of Carlisle held them at bay.
Alongside the garrison soldiers, the men would fire the cannons and the muskets, whilst the women would carry the heavy lead balls up the army ramps to the walls. Even the children did their bit, filling the soldiers' gunpowder horns from large barrels and sprinting the length of the walls, making sure that no one fell short. All this against the elements of November, mind you. Below zero temperatures throughout the night. I mean, the clans were encamped intensely with roaring bonfires close by, but the defenders had nothing other than the will to defend their homes and their city.
Charles soon realised that those defending were in it for the long haul, and that they would never surrender. He'd met his match, that of equal determination to his own. He had to form a cunning plan if he was to outdo this unexpected persistence. It came to him almost immediately. He would starve the city into submission, and so, for the days to follow, every farmer, indeed every person that attempted entry into the city, was shot on sight. No food destined for Carlisle would make it beyond his encampment. Charles believed that it would only be a matter of time before empty stomachs would cause the defenders to question their capabilities of holding the city, and that they would soon surrender.
Durand, the garrison commander, basically wanted to carry on, but obviously food was starting to run short. The militia, who numbered about 700 in the city, obviously they'd been paid for the first part of the siege, but they hadn't been paid. And essentially it's the militia whose numbers, they outnumber the garrison of the castle, literally, almost 10 to 1. So it is those officers, on behalf of their men, who elect to seek terms of surrender, whereas Durand, the colonel commanding the castle, had actually refused.
It seemed that the past 6 days and nights had been in vain for the courageous defenders of the city. But their actions would soon prove to be more than a mere hindrance to Prince Charles and his advancing army of Scotland. It was through the English Gate, the most southern point of the city, the Highland army entered Carlisle in joyous celebration, for they had succeeded in their plight. Following their occupation, a small group of clansmen were left to hold their captured city, and Charles led his army south towards London and the royal palace to overthrow the monarchy. But even he had failed to appreciate the actions of the people of Carlisle.
Actually, whilst Carlisle held the Jacobites in the north, Much needed time allowed the government to withdraw troops from Europe to reinforce the capital in the south. By the time the Jacobites reached Derby, still with 120 miles to go to London, it was too late. 30,000 redcoats had arrived back from France, and now, in 3 separate divisions, were moving in on the clans. Charles had no choice but to turn and run for Scotland. His invasion of England was over.
So, to answer the question, did the actions of the people of Carlisle lend a direct hand to the failings of the Jacobite uprising of 1745?
Most certainly.
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt about it.
It is believed that if Charles and his Jacobites had succeeded Carlisle in quick time, a day or two instead of a week-long siege, then his Highland army would have certainly reached London before government troops had made it across the Channel back into England. And to that end, it must be considered that without the brave and gallant action of the people of Carlisle, the defenders of the city, then maybe, just maybe, life in Britain as we know it today, and indeed the royal family, may have been very different. I'll leave that thought with you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.